Welcome back to Swordman Josh Gaming, and a couple days ago I posted the Fog Mill Pauper deck that I absolutely love playing, and I said I would go ahead and put up the original Pauper Mill deck that I created. This was my first Pauper deck, except for one back in the, I want to say probably late 90s that I created back when it was Type 2. And I've talked about that one also. I'll show it off some other time, which that deck's not Pauper legal anymore. But as I promised, I'll go ahead and show this deck off. This was my original design. It doesn't work nearly as well as the Fog Mill deck, because this one's built around having your opponent's discard cards rather than you drawing cards and having card selection. But we'll quickly go through it. So this is the creatures that are in this. I talked about in that last video, Jace's Phantasm, great for discard decks. It is 10 or more. I couldn't remember in that video whether it was 7 or 10. But for 1 blue, it's a 1/1 flyer. But if your opponent has 10 or more cards in their graveyard, it's a 5/5 flyer, which is very easy to do with this deck. So it ends up being a win con. So a full play set of Jace's Phantasm. If I can get them fanned out like I normally do. So the next card that you're running, which is a decent sized blocker as well, is Selhoff Occultist. And this deck, like I said, this is just made out of spare cards I had laying around, and this was my first draft of ever making a Pauper deck. But whenever another target creature dies, whenever this or another creature dies, and that's not just your creatures, that's your opponent's creatures also, target player puts the top card of their library in their graveyard. So it creates a great blocker against 1/1 aggro decks, and then when their 1/1 creature dies with blocking this, or if this dies also in a trade, then they're milling the top 2 cards of their library. There's 4 of these guys. And last but not least, in the creature suite is 4 Cathartic Adept. It's 1 blue for a 1/1, and you just tap it, and target player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So you can already tell it's pretty heavy graveyard strategy. So those are the creatures that are in it. This one, unlike the other one, is running quite a few counter spells. So in here we have 4 OG counter spells. We have 2 counter mans, which is a counter and a mill card at the same time. So it's a counter target spell, and then it's controller, which means the controller of the spell. They put the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this is very similar to, and would be better now, is the card from Throne of Eldraine that does very similar, and I think it's also, I believe it's mill 3 though, but the counter spell I believe is also 3 mana. 3 mana for it instead of 4, so it's easier to cast and keep mana up for it. Then we're running 4 Rune Stags. So a great counter spell. Counters a spell. It's basically a force spike for 2. But it's a force spike that gets bigger with each rune snag that's in your graveyard. So it's 2 mana for rune snag, and then 2 mana for each rune snag in your graveyard. So as you cast this, as the game goes on, they continue to get they progress with the game linearly. Blah, I can't speak today. And then I know these last 2 are not counter spells, but blue's not complete without a couple of bounce spells. So 2 Silent Departures. I'll get a Gurmag Angler or something like that off the board. It's basically 1 blue, return target creature to its owner hand. This is at sorcery speed. You could run Unsummon. However, this has a little bit more utility because it does have a flashback for 5 if a game runs long. The only downside is this versus a bunch of other ones is it's at sorcery speed. So that's your bounce and your counterspell suite, and then this is the discard suite. So one of the persistent discard cards, or the only persistent discard card in this deck, is Curse of the Bloody Tome. It's curse at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep. That player puts 2 cards into their graveyard. So if you curse them once, it's 2 cards. Curse them twice, it's 4 cards. Get all of them on them, it's 8 cards every upkeep. You can get out of control pretty quick. So 4 Curse of the Bloody Tome. And then we have 4 Tome Scours, which is, I have a kitty. You can see her right over here trying to crawl on my desk. Oh, here she is. 4 Tome Scours, which is 1 blue for the top 5 cards of target player's library to discard it, or to mill it. 4 Tome Scours. We are running 4 Mind Sculpts, which is a blue and a colorless for milling 7 cards. We're running 4 Dream Twists, which is a blue instant for milling 3 cards with a flashback for 2. So for 3 mana, you get to mill 6 cards. 4 Thought Scours for a blue. Somebody mills 2 cards and you draw a card. So that's the whole deck. There's not a lot of draw in here, which is where it stumbles considerably because it can't keep the pressure on. So your pressure comes, most of the time if this deck's going to win, it's denying your opponent resources by making them mill it, countering anything that they play that's good, and then a lot of times killing them with damage with Jace's Phantasm. It's a very simple deck. Oh, and here's how simple it is and how easy I did it. Literally the land base is just 20 basic islands. I didn't go anything fancy with this. I mean, you could run lonely sandbars in here or any number of other cycling lanes to be able to speed this up. I just didn't do it. This deck could be better, but this deck's a great starter deck to teach somebody mill strategy, which I've used that for, to teach somebody that mill is a viable strategy and let them play and watch it work. And then they can step up and you can show them the fog mill deck for Pauper standards of how card selection and being able to draw while making somebody else mill can actually be a whole lot better than just trying to straight up mill somebody out when you have no card draw yourself. Because you actually, and a lot of you guys who play Magic will understand that if you're not constantly drawing cards or have a way of drawing cards, you're going to lose gas and you're not going to be able to finish out a game. That's what happens with this deck regularly, but it's a great teaching deck and it's super cheap. I mean, I think the most expensive card in here are obviously the 4 counter spells. Counter spells, for some reason, even though they've been reprinted multiple times, they never go down in price. And the 4 Jace's Phantasms. I think these are about $1 a piece, maybe 50 cents to $1 a piece. And then the counter spells are expensive. Everything else in this deck is super, super cheap, and you can put it together real easy and be able to teach somebody the principles of a mill strategy without investing a lot of money. And I've used that multiple times for that, and it works out great. And also it has every single aspect of the game in it. So it is what it is. I promised everybody that I would put it out there, so I've done that. It's now in the archives for forever on my YouTube channel. And I may or may not keep this together because I like the Fog Mill deck so much more. And the only reason I would rip it apart, to be honest, is because I could really use these 4 counter spells in another deck. Other than that, everything in this deck is just spare cards laying around. But I don't have enough counter spells to run around into all of my decks. But for right now, it'll stay together, and I enjoy pulling it out every once in a while and seeing how close it can get, but never cross the finish line. But if you like this deck tech, let me know. I'll put up some other Pauper deck techs. I have, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 more that I have that I like to play that I've created. One thing I love about the Pauper format is just the cheapness of the deck and how many you can keep around, just for fun to pull out every once in a while. But I hope everybody's having a great week, and hit the like button. Leave a comment down below what you think about this deck. Again, this is a very casual deck. It's not going to win any Pauper tournaments or anything. And may Keep Calm Kitty be with you.